Twain said to Kipling, get your facts first, then you can distort them any way you please. That meaning to research it. If you write something and you make a claim in there that is patently absurd, people will lose respect for the story.
Welcome to Tapping Creativity, a podcast for the creative community. Yes, it's a podcast for you. Whether you're looking for insight, inspiration, or community, you found yourself in the right place. My name is Matthew Temple. I am the host, and on this podcast, we go into questions, inspirations, challenges of the creative process. It's about connecting with other artists, hearing what other people are struggling with, their wins, their challenges. If you like what you hear, make sure you subscribe, follow, share. If you really like what you hear, give us a thumbs up or give us some kind of review. And with that, let's hop into this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Tapping Creativity. Today I'm taking a little bit of a sideways angle into the question of our inspiration and creative process, because I think that very often as artists, as creatives, we look inside for our inspiration, or we look to other artists and like what's living within us. You know, if you look at, say, Adele, who its beautiful album 21 was not inspired by world events. It was inspired by events within her own life. And I think that's obviously a very strong place to pull inspiration from. But our guest today obviously has a connection to the subject of his most recent book, but is also found inspiration from what's going on in the world, what's in the newspaper, what are the conversations that we're having on this bigger scale. So today we are joined by Eldridge Hanes, who his friends call him Redge, and I guess we're now friends, so I'm going to call him Redge too. Redge has his new book is The Bus to Beaulah, is a novel that really goes into the questions of human trafficking, immigration, migration, and sort of how it impacts people on an individual level, while also looking at some of the broader themes around that. So, with no further ado, Reg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
The Bus to Beaulah, beautiful novel, by the way. Where was your inspiration in writing this novel, and why this particular topic?
Well, inspiration is always you're right. That's an interesting question. My first two novels, in fact, my first one was totally built on the arts. I have been very involved in the creative process and the arts, and my first novel, Billy Bowater, was based on my experiences in North Carolina and Washington to basically try to prevent some legislators from killing the National Endowment based on an art show, on a particular photograph in a particular art show that caused enormous controversy. I didn't have to do a lot of research because I'd lived it. The second one dealt with environmental issues that I was very involved in on a committee I was appointed to by the governor to look at environmental issues in North Carolina. And that book sprung from that. This book had nothing to do with my own personal experience, but it was based on an article that a friend of mine referred me to that was published in BuzzFeed about 4 or 5 years ago, called The Coyote. And it was about a man in North Carolina who used to work for the state as a labor organizer, which is to say finding cheap labor for the farmers, and got fired and set up a company based on a lot of research in immigration law and housing, etc. And his business was to apply for and process and acquire temporary seasonal work visas for agricultural workers. To make a very long story short, over the years, he made tens of millions of dollars because he would charge $1,000 per visa, and he'd be processing 20, 30,000 a year.
Wow.
Yeah, his giving he had an office in Mexico in Monterrey, for example, which would help recruit workers. Well, if you're going to recruit workers of that kind in Mexico, then you're going to have some friends and people that are going to be your partners that aren't necessarily the best partners in the world. Human trafficking and drugs are the province of the cartels in Mexico. Period. I mean,
Right.
that's who you deal with. So
So interesting. So you found this article that you read that inspired you, but yet you obviously have some sort of personal connection if you're going to spend, because I know what it takes to write a novel. You know, you've got over 300 pages here. So if you're going to spend that much time with a subject with the characters in it, there's also got to be a personal connection. So I'm curious, what drew you to and what was your personal connection to this topic and this story?
curiosity. I found the fact that within our society, within North Carolina, almost no one that I know has any idea that over 200,000 people come into this state every year just in the agricultural business to help us, plant, harvest, process, clean, ship, etc. I mean, there's an entire society that underlies the society that we generally know that
Wow.
nobody knows about.
Yeah,
Um,
amazing.
I mean, 200,000 people in California, it's probably closer to 2 million.
Right.
How many of the crops that come out of California are brought in, are done with machines? Not
Right,
very
sure.
many.
Too
Yeah.
during COVID, we had the issue where, temporary agriculture visas weren't being granted, helped to drive up the cost of food and meant a lot of food had to be destroyed because there was no one to pick it. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
There was
very
a book that a
fascinating.
woman gave me that she edited, printed by the University of Texas, called The Human Cost of Food. That was one of the most revealing things I've ever read because it really, it really drew out precisely what is involved
My goodness.
in the cost of people and personnel
Yeah.
with all of our food.
So I'm curious. Before I have a few other questions, but I could do a little sort of read up. What, in your words, tell me about this particular story, the bus to Beaulah, because I want my listeners to get a little insight into the story itself, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the process.
Well, the reason I'm a fiction writer is I think that a good story, which is also based somewhat on fact. I mean, one of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain, he gave a piece of advice to Rudyard Kipling when he visited him in Connecticut. And when he left, Twain said to Kipling, remember this, get your facts first, then you can distort them any way you please. So you need to have some basis for it, that meaning to research it. If you write something and you make a claim in there that is patently absurd, they will lose respect for the story. So how do I get across that point? Well, I chose in this case to have a young woman named Maria Puente, who was raised and educated in Mexico near Monterrey by her aunt, since her mother had died in a unfortunate street altercation with the cartels and so forth. And she was, and her, that's her mother's sister raised her with the help from her mother's brother, Tomas, who lives in North Carolina and came there with a Mexican company, was subsequently hired to run a big automotive operation for an American, has a green card. He paid for her education and he wants to bring her to live with him now in North Carolina. So she is educated, she has a college degree, she speaks several languages, and she is on her way. And he gets her a ride on a bus that's bringing in workers by a guy named Albert Waters, Albert Ruffin Waters, nickname Rough Waters. And his business is to get visas for people and bring them in. And he owns the bus company that brings them. So he helped Tomas get her a 1B multi-year visa. So he gives her a ride on his bus. Well, at the last stop they make before they get to Beaulah, North Carolina, she is in the ladies' room bathroom and overhears the two other ladies that are on the bus, all the rest being men, arguing and then in a huge fight because one of the women, the younger of the two, finds out that she is to be a prostitute and not a cook as she thought. Well, Maria overheard this. And so when the older lady said, "What did you hear?" She said, "I didn't hear anything." But the man who came to pick the other two women up suspects that she did, as did the older lady. So he takes it on his own to grab her and they kidnap her. And he takes her along with the other two women to a secluded house. Um, when her uncle calls to find out why the hell she wasn't on the bus, where is she? One of the people, the employees of Mr. Waters, just panicked, said, "Well, we don't know. We don't know." He put her off and put him off. And he finally said she never got on the bus in Monterey. So we're checking to see where she is, but we don't know because she didn't get on the bus. Well, the uncle goes to the local sheriff, and they both know that's a complete lie because her aunt had called and said she's on the bus. So the sheriff, in checking around, talks to the FBI. They said, unless you've got something concrete, we can't activate. But I will tell you this: this was a friend of his in the FBI. You don't have long. If you don't find her, then she's gone forever.
Right. And that's what really launches us into this story of the parties working together in order to uncover this. And I think one of the things that was so lovely about this is that, first of all, it's just, just right even in the very beginning, right? It's your epilogue that just kind of sets us up for like, oh my gosh, what is going to come next? Or your prologue, I should say. You've got this story that also sort of weaves in these, now you have a real human connection to a larger event. So I'm kind of curious, there's as a novelist, now this is your third novel, getting to create and understand and know these characters is something that you become pretty good at. But then you also had to do your research. You just mentioned this great quote from Mark Twain. So you had to get your facts straight. What is your process of doing your research in order to make sure your facts are straight? Because you're dealing with, you're dealing with immigration law, you're dealing with local law enforcement, you're dealing with FBI, you're dealing with a lot of stuff that required research. Tell me about that process.
Well, I have been around a fairly long time. I'm not a young fellow, so I've got a lot of contacts in North Carolina. I ran for the state Senate in '96. I am very active in North Carolina politics, which means I have a lot of connections. So I went to the Research Triangle Institute, which is part of a place in North Carolina between Chapel Hill and Raleigh and Durham, the three major universities, and got a big study that they had done. I knew the director. And from there, I talked to individuals in reasonably knowledgeable positions within the Department of Labor, Commerce, the Attorney General's office, to find out specifics on that, Department of Health, through labor. And I spent 8 months to a year. Got contacts with a number of very large farmers in the state, Christmas tree farmers as well as Eastern farmers. So
you basically are saying you built yourself a network, but then you also, proactively went and you were pulling in books and you were articles and research that you were able to find access to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, even down to a local level, trying to get information from a local sheriff's department, because, if you've got a county that only has a population of a couple of thousand people and you bring 6,000 people in, because, the little farms in North Carolina are going by the board, like in all over the country. So you have a big farmer in California, he might farm 50,000, 60,000 acres. He doesn't own them all, but he farms them. And it's the same in North Carolina. So we don't have a lot of little family farms. They got some really big damn farms, and they need a lot of people, but they're not people who live in the little town. the little towns are drying up, and
Sure.
these people are living in labor camps that are spread out, some visible and some not.
Wow. Let's kind of go back a little bit. So I didn't share all of this in my introduction, but you were in active duty. You also earned a Bronze Star during that time. You had corporate jobs, as you mentioned. You ran for state senate. You've had a lot of experience, and now you've become, you've written 3 novels. What was your path into becoming a novelist?
I'm a reader. I mean, everybody who writes books at one point in their life was an avid reader of books. I've also got a big mouth, and I was nicknamed at Duke by my roommate the one man conversation because I like telling stories. I like hearing stories, but I mainly read. And, at some point where you feel strongly about something, in particular, I guess, in my first novel, that was an issue that was part of my life, and the people that are in it are people that I knew. Uh, Obviously, not named the same, but
Yeah,
it was a
sure.
story that I had to tell to me. The second was a very similar thing. This one is different in that I didn't have any background, but the issue itself is pretty topical today. Immigration, and there's a monumental amount of ignorance out there, and emotion, and the people that are using that emotion for their own personal benefit, to me, should be ashamed of themselves
Yeah.
because they're putting out a lot of lies about a group of people who virtually sustain us.
Right. And I think that you're by doing that through story, by actually putting the human connection to it, is so vital because it's so easy to other people, right? And even when we read about it in the news, very often it's about statistics. You even threw out, 200,000 people. Well, 200, how do I have a connection to 200,000 people? That doesn't make any sense. So by kind of like coming into it, it was really, and I think an important way of putting a spotlight or bringing attention to the topic. But if you go back, just kind of like take me back to that first novel where you now have a manuscript, had a career, you've had a fulfilling life, then you bring some of your passion into this creative endeavor. And now you have a manuscript and you have to do something with that manuscript. It's got to go from being on your computer or a stack of sheets on your desk to being a published novel. What was that process like?
Well, a friend of mine who is a writer, who is a very successful screenwriter and playwright, encouraged me to go to a weekend sponsored by the North Carolina Writers Network, which is a statewide operation. And I said, I'm not really a writer. I like reading and writing, and I've done that. So he said, no, no, just go. So I did. And I went to a number of classes and seminars, in particular, that a woman really extraordinary gave. And I just decided right then, I said, I have a story, and I've always had this story that I want to tell, and she can teach me. And so I eventually was the vice president of the North Carolina Writers Network,
Of course you were.
and, and spent a lot of time with this person, and sent her some early work. She got a copy of something that I'd written, a chapter, and she said, Reg, let me tell you something. I'll give you some advice that a teacher of mine once said. If you decide you're going to write a story about a bear, bring on the bear. So I said, so let me ask you, you're saying that she said, you're wasting a lot of time and you're going to lose somebody. By the time they get to page 20, they're going to say, I don't give a damn what's happening because I'm bored. So she said, you got to get someone engaged in a story, in the people, in the life, in whatever. And in the bus to Beaulah, I hope and I think from what you say, I grab you with the prologue and you say, whoa, what's this? Now,
Yeah.
my first book didn't, my second book didn't have a prologue, but I threw you into the action pretty quick. I
Yeah.
brought the bear on pretty fast. So I learned, from the conference, and then subsequently I took courses and studied under this person,
So
and
basically,
refined.
the short and long of it was it was a process that took many years of going from ideation to draft to or pen to paper to draft to more drafts to more drafts to more drafts until you finally had
Right,
something that somebody said, this is worth me making an investment and printing a whole bunch of Reg's words on this paper.
right,
Yeah.
right. Well, everything what we do does take that. I mean, I once had the privilege of listening to Andre Segovia, great guitarist, and he was an older man when I met him and knew him. And I said something to the effect of, "You still practice?" He said, "I practice every day. I write every day." A musician plays their instrument or they sing or whatever every day. I
That
mean, you
that
don't,
is so key, right? Because if you don't do that, and it's the same thing athletes, right? Well, if someone's
yeah,
hitting 70 home runs in a season, why do they need to practice? But they need to
yes.
practice in order to hit 70 home runs, right?
How many golf balls does Tiger Wood hit in his life? I mean, you
Yeah.
couldn't calculate that high.
Right, exactly. So I want to ask you
Well,
one
and
other
that's,
question,
yeah,
actually, and that is, since you had this quite an illustrious career before you became a writer, how did your non-writing career help you in this career as an author?
discipline. I mean, if you're going to be successful and manage, I mean, in the business I was in, we had offices in 5, 6 different countries and, you know, 1,500, 2,000 employees. And you get hit every day with a lot of stuff and you have to focus. You have to focus yourself down and say, this is where we're going to go. This is how we got to get there. And you just have to have the discipline to make yourself get there. It's the same thing with writing. This is a story I'm going to tell, and it's going to take a lot of work. And writing is basically rewrites. Everybody I've ever known, every author I've ever known has said, the first draft might be the skeleton, but then it takes a lot of work to put the meat and the organs and everything in it.
Very
So,
true.
it's just, somebody said, "I want to write. What do you suggest?" And I said, "Put your butt in a seat and start writing."
That I couldn't have said it any better. That's pretty much the exact way I have phrased it many, many times. How do you do this? Yeah, well, you sit your butt down and you work out your fingers. That's how it goes.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Well, this was really wonderful, Reg. I really appreciate you taking your time, and I appreciate all that goes into writing any book, particularly this book, The Bust of Beaulah. It is out now, Spark Press. You can find it pretty much wherever you buy your books. And if where you buy your books, you don't see it, ask them to order you a copy. Really beautifully done. Reg, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It has been a
Thank you.
pleasure and an honor.
My pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Tapping Creativity is brought to you in part by We Strive, a nonprofit organization that works to lead the world towards stronger, healthier, and more sustainable community. We Strive is currently at an exciting juncture in that coming out of the pandemic, it is in a place of looking to see how can it now, as a established organization, be of greatest support to the creative communities as well as communities who are striving in any way they know how to engage in co-creating a better world. If you're interested in learning more, visit westrive.org.